What's up guys, hope you guys have all been well and staying safe. Welcome back to another video. If you haven't caught the last video in this series, it was basically a video on the top 5 budget dress watches at the $500 mark and below. What I decided to do is, instead of expanding that series and upping the price range, we're gonna diversify and talk about sports watches today at the $500 and below budget mark. And hopefully we're going to diversify this series and talk about other kind of specific subcategories of watches. And then as time goes on, once I get $500 and below budget videos of each of those series, we're going to expand the price ranges and go up from 1,000 to 2,000 and so on and so on. And hopefully we're going to start to have videos for sports watches, dress watches, chronographs at various price ranges. That way you can find the exact video to help you out and for what your needs would be. So this video is not going to include any chronographs. It's going to be strictly sports watches. So things like field watches, things like divers at the $500 mark and below. And the order of these watches is not necessarily from best to worst, but it's from cheapest to most expensive. And they're not ranked in terms of preference. They're just ranked in terms of price. So first on the list, this is the Timex Weekender from the Peanuts collection. Timex is one of those unusual brands where they don't necessarily make strictly automatic watches anymore, but yet they always have the respect of watch collectors around the world. And the reason is Timex has a very thorough and long, diverse history in making mechanical watches. When the quartz crisis came around, they decided to specify their lineups into only quartz type watches. One of the main reasons that Timex is always going to have my respect is they actually listen to their customers by doing things like making remakes of watches from the 60s or remakes of the 1979 Q model, things like the Timex Marlin. These are classic Timexes that their customer and fan base specifically told them that they would be very interested in mechanical timepieces from their history. And so they listened and they took their feedback very seriously and they delivered on the requests of their customers. And for that reason, I really do like Timex and the direction that they seem to go with in terms of what watches they decide to make. Another reason that I'm always going to be okay with Timex selling me a cheap quartz watch is, first of all, aside from the fact that they're usually very cheap and very fairly priced, they don't ever pretend to be something they're not. Now, specifically, if I were to draw kind of a comparison between Timex and another watch brand, it would be maybe, I'm not going to name specific watch brands, but something like a fashion watch where on the one hand, you have Timex where they'll make you a $50 quartz watch. There's no crazy branding. There's no flashy ads. It's just a very basic quartz watch. Looks decent. It'll do the job. Here you go. It's $50. You'll be happy with it. On the other hand, the fashion brand is going to give you probably the same, if not lower quality watch at a huge markup. And at the same time, send you crazy stories about how they're trying to change the world with their watches and how you're going to be one of the dreamers and all this crap that I'm sure you're very familiar with that fashion brands tend to do. And so it's very not modest in my opinion, especially when the quality of the product tends to be nowhere near the quality that they are pretending to be giving to you. So for that reason, I really like sort of the modesty and the honesty that comes with Timex. So naturally, Timex is going to be first on my list because they do make pretty cheap watches. This one comes from the Peanuts collection. There is a plethora of different models, color combos, and of course, like the name implies, you have characters like Charlie Brown and Snoopy. You've got a quartz movement. It's a 38 millimeter, very modestly sized watch, 24-hour military time with a nice generous amount of indiglo applied, and a modest water resistance of 30 meters / 100 feet. And the best part is it's dirt cheap, $50, and it's all yours. Moving on, of course, we have the very famous Seiko NK800 series. Now, this is a watch from the Seiko 5 lineup, this series being specifically about field watches. The SNK803 is sort of a beige cream model. The 805 is my personal favorite. It's a military green. The 807 is blue, and the 809 is black. Across all of them, you've got a 21 joule basic automatic in-house Seiko movement. I think that's already a lot of value to be had for the price point. Lumi bright hands. You got a see-through display case back and all in a nice modest 37 millimeter case. Now, from a distance, it looks like you have a NATO strap, but if you actually get up close, they're actually fabric straps with actual spring bars. Now, I don't mind their choice of fabric because if you know the entry-level Seikos, their bracelets tend to be very flimsy and cheap folded link bracelets. So to have like sort of a fabric strap is a welcome change at the entry-level price point. And on top of that, you get a very nice military field watch aesthetic, and all this for about $100 to $120. I don't think it can be beat. Now, next, we got the Seiko SRPE and SRPD line. There's almost no way you haven't heard of these watches. It's a line of watches that pays tribute to the original SKX. I kind of agree with what they did. They took the SKX and turned it into a whole line of budget sports watches in all sorts of colors from bronzes to burgundies. The SRPE and SRPD watches are basically the same thing, except the SRPE has no dive bezel on it. Now, I get not everybody was happy with what they did to the SKX line, but me personally, I can't really fault Seiko for what they did, especially because they allowed themselves to sort of take such an incredible and long-lasting name, the SKX, turn it into a whole line of watches and be able to expand and diversify sort of that SKX badge into many different colors, many different styles. And I think that was, to be honest, from a business perspective, I think it was a great move. And I do enjoy being able to have the SKX in many different versions. Not everybody's going to agree with me. Some people think that the SKX should have been left at the SKX, but they have to move with the times, right? So I can't fault them for what they did. And especially because most people are upset that they merged the Seiko 5 line with this SKX. To me, it sort of elevates the Seiko 5 line. You know, they're kind of known as cheaper-ish watches, but by integrating the SKX into the Seiko 5, or at least spiritually integrating the SKX into the Seiko 5 line, I think they've sort of elevated the status of the Seiko 5 into sort of a higher-end, entry-level automatic watch. I think that's a perfect move. So good job, Seiko, for that. But regardless which color you pick or variant, you got a manual and automatic winding, a 41-hour power reserve, Hardlex crystal, day date complication, and Lumi-Bright hands and markers. If I were personally to pick one up, I would go for the SRPD 87 because personally I'm a sucker for blue dials and I love the SKX 007. So to me, it's sort of the best of both worlds with the SKX with the blue dial. Perfect. And by the way, you can pick one up for about $200. Amazing. Next on the list, we've got the Dan Henry 1970. Now, if you're not familiar with Dan Henry, they're a brand that makes mainly vintage aesthetic watches. That's actually how they specifically market themselves. Their models are named after years as well. They typically do sort of more classically inspired, classically designed watches. They're a little bit dressier, I would say, but they do also make divers, and that's the one we're looking at today. So the 1970 comes with some very sexy specs. It's powered by the Seiko NH35, giving you a 41 hours of power reserve in a 40 millimeter stainless steel case. It's pretty thick though, at 14.8 millimeters thick. That's probably my only gripe. 22 millimeters lugs, 45.7 millimeters lug to lug, and you also get a screw down crown, allowing you to have a 200 meters of water resistance. The coolest part to me for this price point especially is that the dive bezel actually on the inside. It happens, but it's a lot less common than an external dive bezel, and I think for the money, it's great to be able to have that option. I think personally Dan Henry is a very underrated and underappreciated brand, and they're especially going in the right direction, I think, with paying tribute to older watches and classically designed vintage watches. I think that is sort of a spot that, without a doubt, watch lovers are very interested in that section of the market, sort of more classically refined, more dressy, more modest pieces. And so to be able to make an entire brand, I don't know what that sound was. I don't know if you heard that. To make a brand based solely off the vintage aesthetic, I think it's a perfect move, and I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be rushing to buy one of these. All right, working our way up the food chain, we're basically capping out our $500 budget with the Hamilton Khaki Field Officer. This is the reference number H694-39363. The Khaki line started in 1914 with a strong military pedigree, as you can see, with sort of the field watch aesthetic. It specifically pays tribute to a military spec watch under the MIL-W-46374 label, which you can see right here. They look very similar, and to be honest, I think it just looks totally badass. I had a chance to wear one, and they wear amazing thanks to a 38 millimeter case, and they're actually just slightly under 10 millimeters thick, which is fantastic. Especially with field watches, it's nice when they're pretty thin because it just gives you less chance to like bump it on rocks or whatever the hell. It's nice. The thinner a watch, the less chances it has of bumping into something. And I think for a field watch, that's a great quality to have. It features the caliber H50, which is basically a modified ETA 2801-2, giving you an amazing 80 hours of power reserve. And finally, we've upgraded to a sapphire crystal. First watch in the video with a sapphire crystal, as well as Super Luminova Lume, which is pretty good. Although I will say, in my experience, the Seiko Lumi-Bright tends to shine not as bright initially as Super Luminova, but Seiko's Lumi-Bright tends to hold the shine a little bit longer for some reason. I don't know why, especially because Super Luminova tends to be found in watches that are a little bit more expensive than things like SKXs and things that would typically carry Seiko's Lumi-Bright. But anyway, just decided to give you my experience between Lumi-Bright and Super Luminova in case you were curious. That was the video, guys. Hope you guys have enjoyed. Please don't forget to like and subscribe down below. And please let me know what you guys think of these watches. And if there's any watches you would have for $500 and below, super interested to hear your opinions. And I love opening up conversations with you guys. On that note, until next time, I hope you guys stay safe. Take care.